Hello, and welcome to another digital literacy workshop module. My name is Tyler Wright. I am the digital literacy instructor here at Workspace Spokane. And if you're watching this video right now, it's because you want to learn more about Android and Chrome OS. Our agenda for this module, you can see here on the screen, we're going to start off with a brief introduction into Android and Chrome OS and what they are. And then we're going to dive into Google accounts. Now, if you've taken the email module, some of the things that we talk about might look a little familiar, and that's okay. After we finish talking about Google accounts, we're going to talk about the home screen and what that means. And then we're going to talk about applications themselves. That's a big important topic as we talk about Android. With applications, that's going to lead us into the Google Workspace, which are some specific applications that we want to know about. And then we're going to dive into internet safety. And if you've taken the internet module, again, you might see some overlap there. There might be some familiar things in there. Once we finish up with safety, we're going to finish off by talking about the Google Assistant. Let's get started with a brief introduction into Android and Chrome OS. And when we talk about Android and Chrome OS, what we really need to talk about is Google. Google is a name you should already be familiar with. Unless you've been living in a cave for the last 3 decades, chances are you've heard of the company Google. When we're talking about Android and Chrome OS, Google is an important name to keep in mind because everything revolves around Google, specifically your Google account. Now, if you have an Android phone or a Chromebook, chances are you already have a Gmail address. If you have a Gmail address, you have a Google account. Your Google account is extremely important, especially here in the modern world. Over the last probably decade, I have helped people set up Google accounts, recover Google accounts, and do a lot of work with their Google accounts. Your Google account, in my opinion, is equally as important as your SAW account. It's equally as important as your social security number or your driver's license. There's a lot of information that goes through your Google account, so you want to keep your Google account information safe. Your username and your password for your Google account, those should be some of your most closely guarded pieces of information. Now, the reason why we want to talk about Google this way, Google has created what we call an ecosystem. It's a series of applications and programs and operating systems and tools and technology that all work together through your Google account, and it's free to use. Now, if you've encountered me here in the lab or you've talked to me in any capacity, chances are you understand I like free. Free is a good number for me. So the fact that Google has created an entire ecosystem that is free to use, that's incredibly important. And it's incredibly accessible for many, many people. Now, why do we care? Google owns Android. If you have an Android phone, it goes through Google. If you have a Chromebook, that runs on Chrome OS. Chrome OS is owned by Google. Chrome OS is the name that we give for the operating system on Chromebooks. Android is the name that we give for the operating system on our smartphones and our tablets. After I just finished giving you that big spiel about how important your Google account is, let's talk about creating a Google account. Let's see what that actually looks like. Now, when you first want to create a Google account, typically we're going to start with the website google.com. And you can do this from almost any computer, any browser, as long as you have access to the internet. You can typically go to google.com. It is a very common website that many people visit on a daily basis. When you get to the website google.com, typically up in the upper right corner, you're going to see a small little option for sign in. Now, if we're going to be creating a Google account, this is the first place we're going to go. We're going to go to that sign in button when we're going to select it with a single left click. Once we've selected sign in with a single left click, Google.com is going to take us to a sign-in page, like what you see on the screen right here. Now, this sign-in page is asking us to enter in an email or a phone number that we might use for our Google account. But we haven't created a Google account yet. So we're going to select the option. We can see it down here in the lower left. It's an option that's labeled Create Account. When we select the option Create Account, we get two things to choose from. We can either choose to create an account for ourselves or create an account to manage our business. Now, this is an important thing. There is no rule that says that you can only ever have one Google account. You are allowed to have more than one Google account. You might have a Google account for your personal and private use. And then you might set up a second Google account to manage your business if you choose to. You might set up a third Google account for professional use. I mean, you might set up a fourth Google account for whatever reason you might want. You can have as many Google accounts as you want. Now, if you right now already have a Google account, that's fine. But should you need to set up a second Google account, you can follow these exact same processes. Now, we're going to go through this as if we are creating an account for ourselves. I'm not going to go through the manage business part. We're just going to select for myself. Once you've selected for myself, Google's going to take you to the account creation page. And this is where Google's going to ask you for some personal information like your name, your first name, your last name. And then Google's going to ask you for a user name. And this can get kind of tricky for some folks. When you go to create a username, you're going to have to create a username that positively identifies who you are. Now, when you go to put a username into Google, there might be a possibility that that username's already been taken. The example that you see here on the slide in front of you, we have a fictitious person. Her name is Jane Jobseeker. Jane Jobseeker is creating a Google account as we see here on the screen. And Jane Jobseeker chose her username, Jane Jobseeker. But there might be one other person out there in the world that already has created an account under that name. Now, if you've done any work on the internet, you might quickly find and realize that there are more than one person out there in the world with the same name as you. Right now, as the time of this recording, it's the year 2024, and there's about 8 billion humans on the planet. Google itself has been around for over 20 years. There's a very real possibility that one of those 8 billion humans that exists out there has the same name as you, and at least at one point in the last 20 years, one of those 8 billion humans with the same name as you has already created a Google account using your name. So you might be forced to select a different username. And this is where a lot of folks tend to get in trouble. When you go to create a username, whether it's for a new Google account or really almost any other account, when you go to create a username, you can pick almost anything you want. As long as somebody else out there hasn't already taken it, usually it's going to be available for you to select. But we're not talking about just any account that we might want to create. We might be creating an account for professional use. We might be using this Google account to email potential employers. We might be using this Google account for emailing potential clients or customers if we're using this to manage our own business or whatever that might look like. So when you go to create a username, a good best practice is to make sure that your username is some variation of your first and last names. Now, there's a lot of different ways that can come about. It might be your first name and your last name put together, all one word. It could be your first name dot your last name, or your last name dot your first name, or your first initial and your last name, or whatever combination in between. But as I already mentioned before, there might be more than one person out there in the world with the same name as you, and that person may have already chosen that username. So you might be forced to add something extra to separate you from the other people with the same name as you that exist out there. And that's where folks tend to get in trouble. Let's talk about what makes up a good professional email address. Now, just creating an email address, that's easy. I could go onto Google and create some random username and create an email address, and that's perfectly fine, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good professional email address. The reason why we might want a good professional email address is so that way when we email people like potential employers or customers or clients or whatever that might look like, so that way those individuals can positively identify who they're emailing and who they're being emailed by. So a good professional username is typically going to consist of your first name, your last name, and then maybe some kind of random number to separate you from the other people with the same name as you that exist out there. But there's some things that we want to avoid. When you're creating a username, try to avoid anything that might reference your hobbies or your interests. Now, if you visit me here in my lab, you know that I have a lot of hobbies and interests. I do a lot of cool things here in the lab. But as cool as they are, I'm not going to put them as part of my email address. I'm not going to advertise what those things are. It's not anybody else's business. They don't need to know. Another thing I'm going to avoid is any references to my age. Now, we have an entire workshop called Overcoming Ageism. And one of the things that we find, especially when we look in the realm of employment and reemployment, is that sometimes folks reveal their age as part of their email address. Typically, it comes in those random numbers that people add in. The most common random number that I see at the end of most folks' email addresses, the last 2 digits of their birth year. If I see 2 digits at the end of your email address, and I look at it real close, I can usually determine how old you are just by looking at that alone. Or I might assume your age from that. Either way, it can introduce that topic of ageism, and that could be the difference between you being offered an interview or not. That could be the difference between you being offered a job or not. The final thing that we want to avoid when we create a professional email address is anything that can be possibly misinterpreted. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Let's go through a small little exercise in what makes up a good professional email address. Now, a few minutes ago, I mentioned our fictitious person, Jane Jobseeker. You see a stock photo of her here on the screen. Obviously, she's not a real individual. This is just some random picture we found. Now, we know a couple things about Jane. Jane was born on April 20th of 1962. Jane has 3 daughters. Jane likes to cook as a hobby, and Jane is trying to look for work as an accountant. Now, Jane is going through the process of creating a brand new Google account. And as you saw a couple slides ago, the email address janejobseeker@gmail.com, that's already been selected. So Jane is looking for what might be a better username for her to use. So the very first one that she thinks of is momof3girls@gmail.com. Now, on the surface, there is nothing wrong with this email address. In fact, any of the email addresses that Jane comes up with here in this example, none of them in and of themselves are wrong. But we don't care about whether or not it's right or wrong. What we want is a good professional email address. This email address should be able to positively identify who Jane is and differentiate her from the other Jane job seekers that might exist out there in the world. Mom of 3 girls, in and of itself, is not a bad email address, but it does not help me positively identify that this is the specific Jane job seeker that I want to talk to. Any mother that has 3 daughters could create this email address. The cooking accountant at gmail.com. Okay, now with this one, we might say, okay, well, Jane is looking for work as an accountant. She likes to cook as a hobby. So now she's reinventing herself. She's reimagining her image. She's rebranding herself as the cooking accountant. She's going to do your taxes and bake you cookies at the same time, or whatever that might be. Now, if Jane was setting up her own small business, this might be a great email address for that. But we want a good professional email address. She might be emailing potential employers. And if I tell you that my accountant is cooking something, well, you might assume that maybe my accountant is cooking something funny. If I tell you that my accountant is cooking something, you might assume that my accountant is cooking the books. We might have introduced something that could be possibly misinterpreted. So I wouldn't consider this a good professional email address. The next one that Jane came up with is emptynest.jane@gmail.com. Well, now we're getting a little bit closer because now we have a first name, Jane, but we still don't have that last name. We still cannot positively identify who this is. This could be Jane Seymour, or Jane Fonda, or Jane Doe. And now we've introduced a second complication, those first 2 words, empty nest. Now, when somebody describes themselves as an empty nester, I can't directly assume their age, but I can easily assume that they might be a person of a certain age. Somebody describes themselves as an empty nester, I might assume that they're over the age of 40 at a minimum. This introduces that topic of ageism all over again. While Jane hasn't directly revealed her age, she's revealed extra information that could cause somebody to assume something about her. And that could be the difference between her being offered an interview or not. Now, it works in the other direction as well. janiegirl@gmail.com. Now, again, we have a first name, but we still don't have that last name. And when I read Janie Girl, spelled with 2 R's, I might assume that maybe Jane is too immature for the position, or maybe she's too young for the position. That also introduces that ageism, just in the opposite direction. So we want to avoid both of those. So let's just say, for example's sake, Jane says, okay, Tyler, I get it. I'm just going to use my first name and my last name and nothing else. In a perfect world, this would be a perfect email address. janejobseeker@gmail.com. Now we have a first name, we have a last name, and we have literally nothing else that could be possibly misinterpreted. But as I highlighted before, email like this, Gmail specifically, it's been around for over 20 years. There's 8 billion humans on the planet. There's a very real possibility that at least at one point in the last 20 years, one of those 8 billion humans has already created this email address. And as you saw in one of the previous slides, that's actually the case. So this probably isn't going to be the best email address because it's already been taken. Jane is going to be forced to add something extra to separate her from the other Jane job seekers that exist out there. So Jane says, okay, I'm going to add on some random numbers. Jane.jobseeker.1962@gmail.com. Now, those 4 numbers we see it there at the end, those could be 4 random numbers for all we know. But if I see the numbers 1962, I'm going to read the year 1962. Now I'm going to assume something about Jane. I'm going to assume that's her birth year. Now, I usually see this in a different format. I usually just see the final two numbers, 62. I put on the 19 as an example just to help us out with this. But this is a very common, very real trap that a lot of folks drop into, putting in their birth year as part of their email address. That introduces that topic of ageism, because now I'm going to assume that Jane is 62 years old or somewhere thereabouts. That could be the difference between her being offered an interview or not. So Jane says, okay, I get it. I'm not going to use my birth year. I'm just going to use my birthday instead. I have the same birthday every year. So Jane _jobseeker420 @gmail.com. Jane was born on April 20th, so she used her birthday instead. Now, if you've lived in Washington any number of years, you might have heard of the number 420. And you might think, well, that's an odd thing to put in there, because anybody that reads this email address is going to assume one thing about Jane, and it's not that her first name is Mary. They might assume that Jane likes to smoke marijuana. And the number 420 is a direct reference to weed, to marijuana. Now, illegal or legal, right or wrong, doesn't really matter to me. What matters is what the other person is going to assume about Jane when they read that email address. If Jane was emailing a potential employer, that could be the difference between her getting offered an interview or not. Now, finally, Jane says, okay, I get it. I absolutely understand it. I'm only going to use my first name and my last name and some kind of random number that doesn't reveal any extra information. Jane.jobseeker3 @gmail.com. Now, Jane might have gotten that number 3 because she has 3 daughters, or she could have pulled that number randomly. As somebody who's reading that email address, there is no way for me to assume any extra information about Jane just from that number 3. This is what I would consider a good professional email address, because it positively identifies who Jane is with her first name and her last name, and the random number doesn't reveal any extra information out about herself. Now, when you get finished with this module, I challenge you. Look at your own usernames. Look at your own email addresses. And if you find that your email address or your username reveals extra information about you, well, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Just only use that for private use, for personal use. If you're going to be using something for professional use, maybe you might want to create a new Google account for that purpose. And that is perfectly all right. After we finish determining what we want our username to be, we're going to put that in that section here. Now, the example that we see here on the screen, we ended up going up with the username JaneJobSeeker462 @gmail.com. I'm still not a big fan of that, because that could be assumed as April of 1962, but it would be a very hard stretch to go that direction. The next thing that Google is going to ask you to do is to create a password for this account. And this is another one that a lot of folks struggle with. Creating passwords, it can be tricky, because you want to create a password that, one, you're able to remember, and especially remember later on, and two, isn't going to be easily guessed or hacked. Now, I have a couple of tips to help you out with that. When it comes to creating a good, strong, secure password, I have 3 guidelines for you to follow. First, at minimum, your password should be 12 characters long. If your password is longer than 12 characters, great. If it's shorter than 12, it's too short. The next thing you want is a combination of capital letters and lowercase letters. Use both. And then finally, make sure that you use at least one number and at least one special character. Now, special characters might be things like the $sign or the @ symbol or the exclamation point or the pound sign, also known as an octothorpe, or whatever that might look like. When you finish creating a password, make sure that you write it down somewhere so you can remember it later on, or maybe save it in a password manager, or whatever that might look like. Since Jane has now created her password for this Google account, the next thing that Google's going to ask her for is some personal information like her phone number or her recovery email address. Now, these are optional pieces of information. You do not have to give Google your phone number. You do not have to give Google a recovery email address, but generally speaking, it's a good idea. If for some reason you should forget the password to your Google account, and let's be honest, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, you might want a phone number attached to that Google account to help you recover it later on. Now, you can also put in your birthday, month, day, and year, and what gender you affirm as further ways to kind of verify you are who you say you are, should you need to recover that Google account. Now, there are several different reasons why Google might ask you for your number, and there might be several reasons why you might want to give Google your phone number. Now, I'm just going to briefly highlight what some of those might be. The very first reason you might want to give Google your phone number is so that way you can reset your password in the event that you forget it. Typically, most of us are going to be working with devices like these, our smartphone devices. And of course, with these smartphone devices, we have a phone number attached to them. If, let's be real, when I forget my Google password, because my phone number is attached to my Google account, I can always select that option, forgot password, and Google is going to send a text message to the phone number, and that would be to this device, giving me some kind of code or a way to reset that password. Now, this also helps protect my account. If, and this is a big capital I if a bad guy out there were to ever figure out my password, let's say a bad guy hacks my password and figures out what it is, because my phone number is attached to my Google account, the moment that bad guy puts my password into Google to try to sign in as me, Google's going to reach out to the phone number on file. Google's going to reach out to my phone number and say, hey, are you trying to sign in? Because Google's going to want to verify that it's the real Tyler Wright that's trying to sign in at the time. And typically in most cases, I'll see something appear on my phone. It's going to say something like, are you trying to sign in? And then it might give me a GPS location of where I'm supposedly trying to sign in from. And it might even show me a couple of boxes. One that says, no, not me, with a red X. And then another one that says, yes, this is me, with a green check mark. If I know that I'm not actively trying to sign in, I'm probably going to select the red X, no, not me. And then I'm going to immediately go and change my password. Now, there's a third reason why we might want to give Google our phone number, and it's related to these. Again, if I should ever lose this device, and that is a very real possibility. I can sometimes be a little forgetful, especially if I'm working here in the lab and I get distracted fixing a computer or answering a question or whatnot, and all of a sudden this gets left somewhere and I forgot exactly where I put it. If I'm ever in a position where I have misplaced my smartphone device, because my Google account is tied to my phone number, and because I use an Android phone, my phone can be tracked using my Google account. Now, that's a very good thing, because I can always go on to Google and type into google.com, find my device, And then as I go through that process, I can use my Google account to reach out to my phone and make it ring, or even get a GPS snapshot of where my phone might be at. And that's only possible because I've attached my phone number to my Google account. Now, you might hear this referred to as two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. And in any case, these are going to be very, very common in the world going forward. A lot of our more important accounts, not just our Google accounts, but even things like our SAW accounts and some of our bank accounts and school accounts and even work accounts, use this method to keep those accounts secure. Now, after we finish giving Google some of that optional information, the next thing Google's going to have us go through is the terms and conditions. And of course, this is a whole bunch of legal mumbo jumbo that a lot of folks don't even read. We do what everybody else does. We skip to the very end and we select I agree. Now, Google does make their terms and conditions a little bit readable for those that may not understand the legalese that some of these things are written in. And I do encourage you to go through and read those terms and conditions so you can see what Google does with your data. Once you finish that up, then you select the button I agree down there at the bottom, and congratulations, you've created a Google account. Now, once you finish creating a Google account, then you can sign into Google and go through the entire Google ecosystem and Google Workspace. And that's what we're going to dive into here in a little bit. After you finish signing into Google, you might use that Google account to set up an Android phone or a Chrome OS device. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. Now, when you're working with an Android phone, especially a smartphone like this one, usually the first screen that you're going to reach out to is the home screen. Now, we see an example of a home screen right here on our slide. This is the home screen from one of my old Android phones. This is actually the home screen from my old LG V60. And the nice thing about the home screen is it is completely customizable. If you're working on a Chromebook or almost any other computer, you might hear this referred to as the desktop. We call it desktops on our laptops and desktop computers. We call it the home screen on our smartphone and tablet computers. The nice thing about the home screen on most Android devices is that it is completely customizable. The home screen that you see here on the slide, and I'm just going to get out one of my pen tools here. Let's get out my laser pointer so we can see what we're looking at here. Our home screen is this entire area that we see here. Typically the top bar that we see across the top, this is what we call our notification bar. You can't usually change that up too much. And down here at the very bottom is typically where we find our navigation buttons. We have a button here for back, a button here for home, and a button here for recents. Now, depending on your particular Android device, you might see these three buttons. They might be in different orders. They might have slightly different shapes, but they usually do the exact same thing. The next thing that we want to focus on is the rest of the home screen. And this is where you can set it up almost any way you want. Now, I prefer using things like widgets. Widgets are almost like little mini applications that are constantly running on your home screen. One of my favorite widgets is the time and weather widget. And we can see that right here across the top. This is a widget that shows me the time and the date and also what the temperature is outside. Again, if you visit me here in my lab, you know that I work on a lot of different projects and I do a lot of spray painting in some of my hobby. So I like to pay attention to the weather because when I'm spray painting, I need to make sure that it's warm enough outside. So I might be looking at the weather in this widget to see what the temperature is. I also have another widget here for the maintenance of my phone. Lets me know how much storage I have available. If you've gone through my hardware workshop, you'll understand what that means. I also have another widget here for doing Google searches. I have a widget here for my music so I can control my music straight from my phone. And you might find that there are many other widgets that you use personally. You might find that some of your favorite applications have widgets that you can use on your home screen. You might also have shortcuts to some of your favorite applications on your home screen. And if you don't like the way it looks, switch it up. Change it up however way you want to. Now, if you ever want to change the way your home screen looks, typically all we need to do is press and hold on any blank area of our home screen. So if you were to press and hold with a single finger on this kind of blank area that we see here, this might be where we might find some of our home screen settings and allow us to customize the way our home screen works. On a Chrome OS device, on a Chromebook, we don't get as much customization as what we get on our smartphone devices, but we still do have a desktop style screen. And typically with a Google Chrome OS desktop, we might see something similar to what I'm highlighting here with my laser pointer. And usually we will see a taskbar down across the bottom. It functions almost the exact same way as a taskbar on, say, a Windows desktop. We see a launcher icon down here in the corner that functions very much the same way as the start menu on a Windows computer. And then we might see icons here for some of our most used Android applications. And then finally, a notification or system tray down in the lower right corner where we can see the time, the date, the Wi-Fi status, and the battery status. So now that we've talked about the home screen and the Chrome OS desktop, let's dive a little bit deeper into these operating systems by talking about applications. Now, if you've come through my software workshop, my software module, you probably know that programs and applications, those two terms are kind of interchangeable. Programs are typically what we call it on our traditional desktop computers. Applications are what we call it on our tablets and smartphones. What this is simply just software. Software that lets us do things on our computers. Now, when it comes to Android and Chrome OS, most everything on these kinds of devices are run by applications. When I look at something like my smartphone, almost every function of this smartphone is run by an application. Even the things that I don't normally expect to be an application, those are applications. Your dial pad on your phone, that's an application. The keyboard that you use for typing out text messages, that's an application. Most everything can be traced to something from the Google Play Store. Now, you can download new applications from the Google Play Store, and there are hundreds of thousands of different applications that are available. Now, when it comes to utilizing the Google Play Store, you can usually find that on your Android devices by looking for this icon. This is the icon that Google uses to denote the Google Play Store. And of course, if you want to use this application, you're going to need to use your Google account. If you're already using your Google account on your Android device, it's probably already signed in for you. Most of the applications that you find on the Google Play Store are usually available for free. And that kind of goes right along with the Google theme of keeping their ecosystem free to use. Most of the applications you download from Google Play are free. Some you do have to pay for. It all depends on who made the application and what that application does. Generally speaking, if you have to pay for the application, it might be a better option than maybe some of the free options out there. If you're going to download an application to your phone or tablet or Chromebook, only install applications that come from sources that you trust. If you look at who made the application and you don't recognize who made it or you don't trust who made it, don't download it. Don't install applications that mimic functions your phone already has. And throughout my career in the wireless industry, I have seen hundreds of different phones, and I've had many people come to me over the years, Tyler, I need help. I need you to fix my phone. Something's going on with it. And I take a look at the applications, and I usually am able to spot which one it is because it's an application that does something that the phone itself already has built in. A good example of this is keyboard applications. You can download other keyboards if you want, but why? Your phone already comes with a keyboard application. It's built in. Why would you download another one? What does that other keyboard application do that the one that comes with your phone doesn't? What are you risking by downloading that? Another common one I see is text messaging applications or camera applications. There are some folks that may download a different text messaging application because it's prettier, or it allows for a different theme or different emojis or what have you. There might be folks that might download different camera applications because it adds in different filters or things like that. As a general rule, I say don't install any applications that duplicate or mimic functions that your phone or your tablet already have, because that's usually going to be a big risk. Now, you can access any applications that you install through either the launcher icon like we talked about, or through the app drawer if you have that on your device. Each device is going to be built a little bit differently because there are many different device manufacturers. Some Android devices have an app drawer or an apps button. Some of them just allow you to swipe up from the bottom of the screen, and that's all going to be different and varied. For the most part, you're going to keep the applications that you use the most and the most frequently on your home screen. Having said all of that, we're just going to do a brief little exercise in which application would be safe to download and which applications wouldn't. So what we see here on the slide in front of us is we see 4 different screenshots. Now these are 4 screenshots that came from one of my own Android devices. They're a little bit older. I took them about a year and a half ago or so. So the details may have changed, but the example remains the same. These are 4 different applications that are available on the Google Play Store. And for the most part, these 4 applications all do the exact same thing. They are text messaging applications. Now we're going to go through each one of these 4, and we're going to look to see which application is safe and which applications aren't. So the very first one, let me get my laser pointer out here again. The very first application we see here is an application labeled Messages. And right underneath that, we see the company that made the application, the developer. And this application Messages is developed by a company labeled Messages. I don't like that. That doesn't sound right to me. I don't know who that is. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't trust that. The next thing I see here is I see the icon for the application. Now this icon does look familiar, and if memory serves, this looks like the icon for the Samsung Messages application, but then it has this little interesting orange bubble. Now this would usually be what we would see on our home screen if we had a new message available, but not something I would expect to see as the main icon for the actual application. That's a red flag for me. So I already have two red flags going between the developer being named Messages and the icon looking eerily similar to an application that already exists. And then we take below all of that and we see that this application contains advertisements and allows for in-application purchases. Well, there's my third red flag. Now, if you've taken my email module, you've learned about the 3 red flags. If you haven't, I encourage you to take my email module that's available here in the LMS. The 3 red flags allow me to kind of gauge whether or not something is safe or not. Just looking at this Messages application screenshot we see here, I have 3 red flags between the developer, the icon, and the fact that they tell us that this application contains advertisements. Now I have to sit back and I have to ask myself a really hard question. Why does my text messaging application need ads? That doesn't sound right. That doesn't make sense to me. Why does my text messaging application have things for me to purchase? What would I be purchasing in my text messages? That just doesn't sit right with me. So I might not install this application because I don't feel safe installing it. Now the next one that we see here is an application called Messages. Now it has a beta version of it, and beneath that we see that this application is made by Google LLC, or as everybody else calls it, Google. Now I know the name Google, I know the company Google. I may not trust them implicitly, but I trust them a heck of a lot more than whoever this guy is. Now this is the application that I actually use on my personal devices because I do a lot of work with the Google ecosystem. I do sometimes beta test some of their applications, and this is the application that I use for my own personal text messages because it doesn't include ads, it doesn't include in-application purchases, and because it's coming from a developer that I trust more than the other developers, I feel comfortable installing this on my devices. The third one that we see here is labeled Verizon Messages. Well, it would make sense that the developer would be Verizon. Now, Verizon as a company, I know the name of that company, and while I may not trust Verizon implicitly, well, they're at least a bigger brand and much more recognizable than maybe some of the other developers out there. And then we look right underneath that and we see that Verizon Messages also does include in-app purchases. Now, if you have Verizon service or if you're familiar with Verizon service, you may understand why that might be. Verizon does like to do kind of an a la carte thing where they might nickel and dime certain things. They might have an option where maybe they allow for cloud storage or something like that. And they might have in-app purchases so you can purchase more cloud storage or whatever that might be. Well, that makes sense to me. So while I don't use Verizon service, if I did, I might feel comfortable downloading this application. The final one that we see here is labeled Go SMS Pro Messenger Free Themes Emoji. Now, just by that name alone, I already don't trust it. That's a big red flag for me. When you got to put that many words in the title of your application, we could go into what that means. That would be probably more of a SEO type thing, search engine optimization. They put in a bunch of keywords to make their application more easily findable using different search engines. That's a red flag for me. The next thing that we see here, this application was made by Video Editor and Video Maker Dev. Again, I don't know who that is. I don't trust them. So now I got my 2 red flags. And then we look right beneath that, contains ads and in-application purchases. There's my 3rd red flag. I don't trust this application at all. In fact, in my career in the wireless industry, I've seen this exact application on customers' phones. I've had to uninstall it off of people's phones because in my opinion, it's not a good application. So when we look at these 4 applications, really there's only 2 of them that I would even consider installing, and only 1 of them that I actually trust. They all 4 do the exact same thing. Now, one thing I want to point out, as we looked at these 4 different applications, not once did I ever take a look at the star ratings. Those star ratings mean nothing to me. Now, I might look at the reviews to see what other humans have said about these applications, but I'm not going to make my decision to download just based solely off the star rating, because, well, reviews can be faked. Reviews can be promoted or not promoted or deleted or whatever that might be. So I'm not going to trust those at all. I'm going to trust what other things I see. Now, as you go about downloading and installing new applications for whatever needs you might have, you might also find yourself in a situation where you might need to uninstall applications because maybe you need to free up some space, or maybe you're just doing some spring cleaning and just cleaning out some of the old applications on your phone, or whatever the case might be. If you ever need to uninstall applications off of an Android device, usually the process is very, very easy. If the application is on your home screen, typically all you have to do is press and hold the icon for that application. And typically when you press and hold on the icon for the application, you might see it across the top of your phone, an option for uninstall. If you don't see an option uninstall specifically, you might see an option that says app info instead. If you select the option app info, you're probably going to see something similar to what I have over here on the right side of the slide. And this is an example of the app info for that Google Messages application that I just showed you on the last slide. Notice how right in the very center of this we see a big old button that says uninstall. And if you were to tap on that button, it would uninstall the application from your phone and free up that space. Now, a good rule to live by: only uninstall applications that you yourself installed. If you didn't install it on your phone and you don't know what it does, don't touch it. Take it to an expert or have somebody else take a look at it. The last thing you want to do is accidentally uninstall an application that your phone needs to function. You can also uninstall applications through the Google Play Store. If you downloaded it from Google Play Store, you can uninstall it through Google Play Store. And that's generally a good, safe way to do that. Here on the next few slides, we're going to talk about some very specific applications that we call the Google Workspace. The Google Workspace is a series of applications that have been developed by Google that are pre-installed on most Android and Chrome OS devices, and they utilize your Google account. So just like everything else that we know about Google, they are free to use. And if you're looking at doing some of the basic Office applications like writing documents or spreadsheets or emails, the Google Workspace is a good option if, say, Microsoft or Apple or something else isn't available or isn't feasible. And the nice thing about the Google Workspace is we can get them all right here on our Android devices. Now, I have a list of different Google Workspace applications that you see here on the slide, and we're going to talk about each one of these. But keep in mind, this is not the end-all be-all list. There are many other applications that are in the Google Workspace beyond just these. The very first one that we see here on the list is Gmail. Gmail is one of the primary Google Workspace applications that we encounter on a regular basis. And with our Google accounts, we usually will have a Gmail address. Well, Gmail is the application we use for accessing those emails that we receive at our Gmail addresses. Just like with all of our Workspace applications, this usually comes pre-installed on most Android and Chrome OS devices and works specifically with your Google account. Going hand in hand with our Gmail application is also the Google Calendar. Now, if you use a Windows ecosystem, you might be familiar with Outlook as a program. Well, Gmail and Google Calendar working together are almost exactly the same as what you might see in Outlook. If you use Gmail as your email application, any events or things that you might set up in Gmail will also appear in your Google Calendar. One of the ways that I see this happen on a regular basis, if I ever need to fly somewhere, and I book my flights using my email address, when I receive confirmations of those plane flights, my Gmail will recognize that it's a plane flight confirmation and automatically put an event in my Google Calendar reminding me when to check in for my flight and when my flight is. It's a very useful application for keeping track of your appointments. It works just like in a calendar application. And it's not just for you. You can also share things with other Google users. So my other half and I, we do this on a regular basis. One of the events that she's put in the Google Calendar is our anniversary date. And then what did she do? She shared that anniversary date with me, so now it appears on my Google Calendar. Now I no longer have an excuse for forgetting our anniversary. These next three applications are really kind of an analog to the holy trinity of Microsoft Office. We're going to talk about Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides. The very first one of those is Google Docs. Google Docs is a word processing application. It is free to use and very, very similar in function to Microsoft Word. So if you need to type something up and you don't have Microsoft Word available to you, well, you can always use Google Documents to do the exact same thing. And just like with Microsoft Word, Google Documents has templates available for easy editing and use. One of the nice things that I like about Google Documents, because it's tied to the Google ecosystem and uses your Google account, it will automatically save any documents you create in this application straight to your Google Drive. Now, I recommend this for a lot of folks. I have a lot of folks that come through our building and they want to type up their resumes, but they don't know where to save that resume, or they typed up their resume years and years ago, but they don't remember where they put it or where they can save it or whatever that might look like. So I recommend using Google Documents because it's tied to your Google account. If I need my resume, I just have to go into my Google Drive and I can edit my resume straight from my smartphone computer using the application Google Docs. The next part of that is going to be, now Google Sheets is a spreadsheet application. And guess what? It works very, very similarly to Microsoft Excel. So if you need to create any kind of spreadsheet, you're doing any kind of formula type stuff or anything like that, you can do that right through Google Sheets. And just like Google Docs, it has templates that are available. It's free to use. It's tied to your Google account. And anything you create in Google Sheets automatically gets saved to your Google Drive. The final part of these three is Google Slides. Now, Google Slides is a slideshow application. And following the bouncing ball, this would be an analog to Microsoft PowerPoint. So if you need to create a PowerPoint presentation or a slideshow presentation and you don't have Microsoft PowerPoint available, Google Slides is a good option. It's a good second option. And just like with Sheets, just like with Docs, it's tied to your Google account. It's free to use. You can download it to your smartphone computers. It contains templates for easy editing and creating. And anything you create in Google Slides automatically gets saved to your Google Drive. Now, if you've gone through some of my other basic digital literacy workshops or advanced digital literacy workshops, you probably heard me use that phrase. I compare Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft PowerPoint. That's the holy trinity of Microsoft Office. Well, Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, that's the holy trinity of the Google Workspace. Another application that we find in the Google Workspace is something a little bit more outside the box. Now, this is one of my more favorite applications to work with because it has a lot of different uses, and that is Google Translate. Now, the example we see here on the screen is from Google Translate and the Google Translate website. If you were to go to Google Translate through, say, your internet browser, you might see something similar to what we see here on the screen. There are a lot of different ways that we can use Google Translate, but the basic nuts and bolts of it is I can translate from one language to another using Google for free. Now, one of the ways that I use Google Translate on a regular basis is for when I'm working out here in our resource area, our hub computer area, and maybe I have somebody come in that doesn't speak English. Maybe they only speak Ukrainian or Russian, but they still need to access all the information and materials that we have available on some of our websites. So I might use Google Translate through Google Chrome to translate websites from English into Russian or Ukrainian or Farsi or Dari or Pashto, or there's a lot of languages out there. You can also get this as an application on your Android devices. I have an application, I even have a widget right on my Android device that allows me to speak into my phone, and it will hear it in English, and then Google Translate will automatically translate it to whatever language I have selected, and then I can have it speak it back. There's even a conversation mode. So if you have to converse with somebody who doesn't share the same language as you, as long as you know what other language they're speaking, you can talk into yours and then they can talk back and it will translate back and forth. There's a transcription mode. So if somebody else is speaking in a different language, you can see it read out on your screen in your native language. You even have an option, and you can see this here on our screen. Let me get my pen tool out here for detect language. Now this is exceptionally cool because maybe you have a piece of text. You have no idea what language that text is in, but you know that you can't read it. Well, you can copy that text, paste it into Google Translate, and using detect language, Google Translate will automatically figure out what language it is and translate it to whatever else you want it to translate to. There are a lot of uses with this, and Google Translate works well with our next application, Google Lens. Google Lens, and you can see the icon here up towards the top of our screen. Google Lens, if I were to describe this application, it's like a way to do Google searches using your phone's camera. Now, your standard Google search is, typing keywords into the Google search bar, and Google searches the entire World Wide Web for anything that best matches those keywords. But as the old phrase goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, what better way to exemplify that than through Google Lens? If you can take a picture of something, you can search Google with it. And there's a lot of uses with Google Lens. You can use Google Lens to search for particular things. You can also use Google Lens to scan QR codes. Now, just for an example, I have put a QR code here on the screen. And if you want a nice fun challenge, I challenge you right now, go ahead and pause this video once I finish explaining this and use Google Lens on your Android phone to try to scan the QR code you see on the screen. Now I'm going to demonstrate what that might look like using my own device here. Usually when I do something like this, I might look down towards my Google search widget down here at the bottom. And what I might do is I might look at that Google search widget and look for that Google Lens icon next to the Google search widget. If I were to select that icon, this will then pull up my Google Lens. And you can see here it says search with your camera. So I'm just going to swipe down here and we can see it's giving me this option, search with my camera. And you can see that it's activating my camera. And within my camera, I have this kind of little white square that you see there. Now, if I were to take that square and frame the QR code with that square and press the shutter icon, what a QR code is, in essence, a QR code is a visual hyperlink. If I were to put that white square around that QR code, you might notice that there is a small little hyperlink that appears inside that square. And you can tap that with your finger and it takes you straight to that website. Now, QR codes like the one you see here are very, very common nowadays. A lot of times nowadays, you might find QR codes in many, many different situations. If you go to a restaurant, if you go to some restaurants here in the modern world, there are no menus anymore. You go sit down at the booth or the table or what have you, and there might be a QR code on the table. And that QR code, you scan it with your phone and it takes you to a digital copy of that restaurant's menu. If you look at some of the posters and flyers that we have here around the Workspace building, you might notice QR codes and you can scan those QR codes with your phone and it would take you to maybe the website or the meeting or whatever that poster is about. Now, I mentioned earlier, Google Translate works with Google Lens. So there are options within Google Lens that allow us to actually translate languages that we might see. So here in my Google Lens application, I might see something over here on the side for translate. And if I were to select that, I can now take my phone and put it in front of any other languages. And you can see it will detect what that language is and automatically translate it to English. Now I'm going to take a second. I'm going to see if I can find an example here in my lab that works for this. So what I have here in my hands is a copy of the movie I Am Legend. And you may be familiar with this movie. It came out, I want to say 2007, 2008, somewhere in that range, starring Will Smith. And you can obviously see that this is not a copy of I Am Legend that was purchased in your standard store. This was not something that I found at my local Walmart or anything like that. I'm not going to mention what country I was in when I got this DVD, but let's just say it was not in the United States. It was somewhere in Southeast Asia. And I happened to get this DVD about 2 weeks before the movie actually came out in theaters. And you can see that on this DVD cover, there's a lot of writing that's not in English. Now, I can't read or write a lot of the Asian languages. Maybe if I saw it written out in traditional letters, I might be able to translate it. But I cannot read Japanese kanji. I can't read Korean. Cantonese is unfamiliar to me. It's about as unfamiliar as Mandarin. So I don't understand some of these other languages that we see here on this DVD. But that's okay, because I can use Google Lens to translate that writing for me. So let's see if I can get this demonstration here on camera. I go and I take Google Lens, and let's see what happens when there we go. We can see I put Google Lens right there in front of the lettering, and Google was able to automatically translate it. If I can get it in frame here, there we go. And we can see that it is translating that to English. I could do that with some of the other lettering that we see here. So I got some lettering here on the back. Let's see what happens when I put my camera in front of that. Is it going to read it for me? Hey, there we go. All right. Now I know that was a bit of an awkward example because I'm trying to do cameras in front of phones without actually being able to see it. But I encourage you, when we get finished up with this here today, use Google Lens. Try to find Google Lens on your own personal device and play around with that so you can try to figure out how that translation matrix works. When you start doing Google Lens with Google Translate, you might find that there's a lot of things out there in the world that are pretty cool. Here in Spokane, we have the Asian World Market. My other half and I, we like to go down there and spend way too much money because they have a lot of cool items that you can't usually find at the local supermarket. So we go down there and we get some interesting foods. And of course, I can't read Korean. So my favorite bag of tteokbokki is not in English. I want to cook my little Korean dumplings, and I can't read the instructions. I'm okay because I can use Google Lens and Google Translate. I can now use Google Lens to translate the cooking instructions from Korean to English so I can eat my dumplings in peace. Our next application is Google Photos. Now, Google Photos is another one of those applications that is usually pre-installed on most Android and Chrome OS devices. This is not typically the gallery of your phone, so don't get it confused with the gallery application. Google Photos is an application that allows you to back up the images on your Android device to your Google account. Now it utilizes your Google Drive. Google Drive is something that we might talk about here in a second. Google Drive is free storage space that you get automatically just by nature of having a Google account. Now, typically when you sign up for a Google account, like I showed you how to do several slides back, you automatically get for free 15 gigabytes of Google Drive space. And that's what you get for free. Now, you can pay Google to get more Google Drive space. Generally speaking, I don't recommend doing that. I don't see a need to do that. As long as you manage your Google Drive space, there's really never a reason why you should have to pay for more storage, unless you're going to be utilizing the Google ecosystem for everything you do. I probably would just recommend sticking with the regular 15 gigabytes. When you use Google Photos, you can use Google Photos to back up the photos and the videos on your Android device to your Google account, and it will use that 15 gigabytes. Now, if you've taken my software module or my hardware module, we've talked a little bit about how data is stored. And one of the things I mention is videos take up the most space. So if you're going to use Google Photos to back up your images and your videos on your device, if you're taking a lot of videos, it's going to chew up that 15 gigabytes real quick. One of the main reasons why I advocate for Google Photos is because it's a nice way to back up your pictures if you should ever need to transfer from device to device. One of the things that I see quite often when I worked in the wireless industry was folks that got very nervous about upgrading their phones because they didn't want to lose all their pictures. Well, because I back up everything to Google Photos, when I go from one phone to the next, I don't have to worry about any of that because Google Photos is tied to my Google account. All I have to do is sign into my new phone with my same Google account, and all of my pictures are already saved in that Google Photos application. As I mentioned on the previous slide, a lot of our Google Workspace applications tie into the Google Drive. Google Drive is that free 15 gigabytes of storage that's attached to your Google account. Just by nature of you having a Google account, you automatically get 15 gigabytes of drive space. This is an example of what we call cloud storage. Now, the nice thing about Google Drive is because it's tied to your Google account, it's not stored in any one physical location. My Google Drive is not stored on this device. It's stored on the Google servers in the Google Cloud. And I can access that same 15 gigabytes from any device I go to just by signing into my Google account. Now, this makes it very, very nice to transfer information from one computer to another. There might be times where I'm working on something on my computer at home, but I need to print it out here. If you come and you visit me here in my laboratory, you probably have seen my 3D printer. I'm a big fan of 3D printing. Now, when I do a lot of 3D printing type projects, I might design the file on my computer at home, but I want to print it out on my printer here. Or I might do it in reverse. I might design something while I'm here in the laboratory, but I want to print it on my printer at home. So I will use my Google Drive space and I will take the file that I want to print, upload it to my Google Drive, and then when I get to my printer, I download it and print it out there. By utilizing that Google Drive space, it allows me to transfer information from one computer to another without having to go through the physical action of using thumb drives or anything like that. That cloud storage makes it accessible on multiple devices using that Google account. Now, as I mentioned before, Google Drive is limited to 15 gigabytes, but you can pay Google for more space should you need it. It also allows you to share information with other Google account users. So if I need to share, let's just say the example that we see here, I have my what looks like a template for my WorkSource PowerPoint presentations that I create here. Well, if I'm going to be working on a PowerPoint presentation, I want to use the template that I've already created. If I'm working on that on my computer at home, or if I'm working in it on my computer here, I can access that same template because it's saved in my Google Drive. It makes things a lot easier for me in the long run. The final application that we're going to talk about here in the Google ecosystem is Google Chrome. Google Chrome is the internet browser for Android and Chrome OS. Now, the Chrome OS part would probably be obvious because Google Chrome, Chrome OS, Google Chrome is the browser that you use for everything on a Chromebook. Almost everything on a Chromebook goes through Google Chrome. Now, Google Chrome operates very similarly to other browsers. So if you're already familiar with Microsoft Edge or Safari, or go old school with it, Internet Explorer, you're probably familiar with how to use Google Chrome, or at least the basic layout. You can sign into Google Chrome with your Google account. And this is a nice thing because it allows you to synchronize things like your internet browsing history and any secure password storages that you might have. Google Chrome and your Google account can use as a password manager. So if you find that on your personal computer or your personal phone you're having trouble remembering a lot of the passwords and accounts that you create, maybe you might use your Google account and Google Chrome as a password manager. Now, just a caveat to that. Make sure that if you're going to use Google Chrome as a password manager, don't save any of your most important passwords. I would not recommend saving your bank account password to Google. I would not recommend saving any of your medical account passwords to Google. I would not recommend saving any of your most important, anything where you might have sensitive information or anything like that. I wouldn't recommend saving those to Google, but maybe for some of your other accounts, it's not so bad. One of the websites I like to visit is nuts.com. It's a website where you can go to buy gummy bears and peanuts and things like that because I like my snacks. I have an account on nuts.com. Now, I don't have anything important saved to that website. It's literally just a website where I buy gummy bears. That would be a password I'd be okay saving to Google. I'm not going to save my bank account password to Google. Now here on this slide, we are just going to briefly take a look at the anatomy of Google Chrome. If you want to deeper dive into Google Chrome itself, I encourage you to take a look at my internet module here in our LMS. As we look here at Google Chrome, the first two things that I want to highlight is what we see up here across the top. This section that we see up here is what we call the address bar. The address bar is typically where you go to type in the web address or the URL of the websites that you want to visit. The second section we see down here is what we call the search bar. The search bar is where you go to type in keywords or phrases or questions that you want Google to search the World Wide Web for. The final part is what we see up here in the corner, and this is where we can find our tabs. If you ever need to open up a new tab because you want to visit a second website at the same time as you're visiting one, well, you can always hit that plus symbol that we see here, and that will open up a new tab where you can navigate to a different website. Now here over these next few slides, we're going to talk about some internet safety. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about here are a re-emphasis of what I've talked about in my internet module. So if you see a little bit of crossover, that's a good thing. We're reinforcing all of that. Whenever we are doing anything on the internet, we want to make sure that we stay safe. If I'm ever doing anything online, I'm always going to remember a phrase. And this phrase is very simple. It's just 4 words. Look for the lock. And you can see that right there on our slide. Look for the lock. Now, the lock that I'm referring to is this lock symbol that we see here on the end of our address bar. The lock symbol signifies that we are on a secure website. The opposite of that is this other icon. It looks like a triangle with an exclamation point, and it might even have a message next to it that says not secure. Secure versus not secure are the two kinds of websites that we encounter, and I do a deeper dive into this in our internet module. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind, if you are ever on a website and you are thinking about entering in or giving out any of your personal or sensitive information, remember that phrase, look for the lock. If you don't see that lock symbol, stop. If you don't see a lock symbol in the address bar, don't give out any of your personal information. If you see that triangle that says not secure, don't give out your personal information. Only give out personal information when you know that the website you're visiting is a secure website. Now, there's a lot of other things that might go into that to determine whether or not you feel comfortable giving out personal information, but looking for the lock is going to be your square one. That's going to be your first line of defense. Now, notice how I didn't say good or bad. A secure website is not automatically good. A non-secure website is not automatically bad. The difference between these two kinds of websites is how the website treats our information. If I am on a non-secure website, that means that the information that's going back and forth between my computer and that website is not encrypted and could be intercepted by anybody. If I'm on a secure website, that means that the information going back and forth between my computer and the secure website is encrypted. It's in code. Now, it could still be intercepted, but it'd be a lot harder for a bad guy to do anything with that data. I'm going to feel much more comfortable giving out personal information on a secure website than I am on a non-secure website. That doesn't mean a non-secure website's bad. It just means that I'm not going to give out my personal information. If all I'm doing is reading an article or watching a video or looking at a picture, that's okay. It's okay for that to be on a non-secure website. That just means that I'm not going to give out any of my personal data, any of my personal information. Now, one of the things that we have seen pop up over and over and over again over the last several years is the prevalence of fake websites. Misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation are among the three big threats that can be harmful to us on the internet. So as we are searching for different things, as we're researching different topics, as we're learning about different websites and different skills, we want to be careful that we're not looking at the wrong information. We want to make sure that we're looking at the good, truthful information. If you're going to be doing any kind of research online, and you're looking at a particular article or something like that, make sure you read the whole article. Don't just read the headline. The example that you see here on the screen, the headline reads, "Taco Bell employee has had far greater positive impact on people's lives than firefighter ever could." This is an example of what we call clickbait. There are news organizations, there are websites that exist out there that will write headlines that are intentionally inflammatory, that are intentionally full of language and verbiage that is meant to evoke an emotional response out of you. What do you mean a Taco Bell employee has more positive impacts on people's lives than firefighters? Firefighters save people's lives. They put out fires. They help people in medical emergencies and things like that. Those are great things. What do you mean a Taco Bell employee is better than that? No, I like Taco Bell, actually. I really like eating their burritos. But this article is intentionally misleading. This headline that we see here is an intentional inflammatory headline intended for you to read it, automatically assume you know everything about it, and then share it or click on it or whatever that might be. When you're looking at articles like this, consider the source. Who wrote the article? What website is this article on? Have you ever heard of them before? Do you trust them? Now, if you're trying to figure out whether or not the website you're on is legitimate or not, most good legitimate websites are going to have some kind of About Us section. Now, if it's a fake website that is for satire or entertainment purposes, most of the time they're going to be transparent about that in their About Us section. The Taco Bell employee article that we see here is 100% fake. It comes from a website called theonion.com. You may have heard of The Onion before. The Onion has been around for many, many decades as a parody or satire newspaper. Well, now they do it as a website. And they still have the same inflammatory, the same misleading, the same fake articles. And their About section, they directly state that they are an entertainment website for parody purposes only. But if all you ever do is just read the headline, you may not know that, or you may not even realize that. Now, another way that we can tell whether or not a website is legitimate or not is by looking at the web address. If the web address seems off, well, it might be. The two examples we see here, www.abcnews.com or www.abcnews.com.co. If you're not paying attention to the URL, you might miss that .co at the end of the fake website. Right now, at this point in time, there are over 1,000 websites dedicated to producing fake or misleading content. And a lot of them might have names that sound legitimate. The Denver Guardian or the El Paso Review. Now, here in Spokane, we have a newspaper. The newspaper here in Spokane that we have is the Spokesman Review. Now, having never lived in El Paso, Texas, I don't know what newspapers they have down there. But if somebody told me that they got an article out of the El Paso Review, I have no frame of reference to say that that's false. Because we have the Spokesman Review, it sounds like a legitimate website to me. That's why we need to pay attention to these particular details, making sure that you're not falling into the trap of going down the rabbit hole of a fake or intentionally misleading website. Now, this also ties into online shopping. One of the ways that we use these devices more and more frequently nowadays is for online shopping. Now, when it comes to online shopping, there are a couple of rules that come into this as well. We're still going to follow the same guidelines that I've given you over the last several slides, but we're going to go even more beyond that. If I'm going to be doing any kind of online shopping, I'm going to think before I click. I'm going to think before I tap on something. If it looks like an ad and it smells like an ad, it's probably an ad. If it's an ad, I probably won't click on it. I don't want to tap on ads. If I do a Google search for something, sometimes the very first thing that comes up at the top of a Google search, it says ad or sponsored next to it. I don't want to see any of that, so I might keep scrolling down further until I see something that doesn't say ad. That might be the legitimate one. A good example of what that might look like is what we see here in this graphic here on the screen. Now, at the time that I wrote this PowerPoint presentation, at the time that I wrote this workshop, I was shopping around for PlayStation 5s. And at the time, PlayStation 5s were very difficult to get your hands on. So I go to google.com, I type in PlayStation 5 for sale, and this was the result that I got. Now we can see here there are several PlayStation 5s here for sale. And notice what we see next to all of them. We see this little tag that says ad. Just because it's available for sale doesn't mean it's something good. I might also take a look at some of these other details. Yeah, it's a PlayStation 5, but it's powered for Australia, not the US. So these are all things we want to consider before we even click or tap on anything. We're going to do our research as we look at different products. Now, I might not trust the star reviews, but I'm still going to read them to see what other people have to say about the product. If I look at a particular product and I see that it has a bunch of 5-star reviews and it doesn't have any 1-star reviews, well, maybe I might dig a little bit deeper to see if it's actually a legitimate product or not. I might go and take a look through some of the other reviews, maybe on other websites about that product. I might compare the same product on multiple different websites to see where I might get the best deal. I am going to consider my payment options because when I do online shopping, I'm going to be giving out my personal financial information, whether that's my debit card number or my credit card number or whatever that might look like. I'm going to consider my different payment options. If I have an option, I'm going to use PayPal or a similar service whenever I can. Companies like PayPal allow us to do online shopping, and what PayPal does is it takes your standard debit card number and it masks it under a fake debit card number. So that way, if a bad guy intercepts any of that information, they get a fake number instead of your real one. PayPal is one example of that. Shopify might be another one you might have heard of. I might look to see if the item is available on Amazon, because Amazon has better financial protections than maybe just a regular website. If at all possible, I'm going to try to use my credit card as often as I can instead of my debit card. If I use my debit card on a website and a bad guy intercepts that information, that bad guy is now getting a hold of my debit card, which means he's getting a hold of my personal money. If a bad guy gets a hold of my credit card number, he's not getting a hold of my information, he's getting a hold of Visa's money, not mine, or MasterCard's money, not mine. And if you don't believe me on that, do a Google search for a man named Frank Abagnale, widely considered to be the kind of forefather of identity fraud and financial fraud. And even he recommends use a credit card online whenever possible. Avoid using your debit card directly. If you have to use your debit card, try to go through a service like PayPal, because it's going to be a lot safer for you. Be wary of what information you're giving out. If you're shopping for something on a particular website and that website's asking you for your Facebook password, I might be a little wary of that. Why do you need my Facebook password for me to order a bag of gummy bears? And then finally, make sure you pay attention to your bank statements. As I shop for things online, I'm going to make sure that I go to my bank statement afterwards and look to see if I can find that charge on my bank statement so it reconciles. A lot of times when we look at financial situations where people have had their bank accounts cracked into or their debit cards stolen or anything like that, one of the things that we sometimes see is the bad guy gets a hold of your information, but they don't use it immediately. What they might do is they might wait on it for a couple weeks and then try to push through a small charge like 99 cents or 15 cents or something so small and so innocuous you're not going to notice it. And if that goes through without any red flags, then the bad guy's going to try to hit you for the big charge. Well, if you're watching your bank statements, if you see anything that looks off or odd, call your bank and have them look into it. It's far better for them to get it nipped in the bud when you only lost 15 cents than it is for when you've lost $1,500. Now, the final section that I want to talk about as we get to the end of this module is Google Assistant. Google Assistant is what we classify as an AI, or an artificial intelligence. Google Assistant is not a real, true artificial intelligence. That has not been fully created yet. We're getting really, really close with things like ChatGPT and the OpenAI project. But as of right now, Google Assistant is not a true AI. What Google Assistant is, in basic description, Google Assistant is a very, very complex program that allows us to interact with our computers as if we were interacting with another human being. Google Assistant is developed by Google to help us navigate some of the things on our phones and Chromebook devices. Now, a lot of times you can activate your Google Assistant by saying the keywords. I'm not going to say it right now, but it's going to make all my devices here in the lab go off. But we might say something Google or something to the effect of using the Assistant key. Now, depending on what kind of device you have, you may have a specific button on the side of your phone just for Google Assistant. Now, this is going to vary from phone to phone and device to device. I encourage you and I challenge you, after we get finished with this module, take a look at your personal devices and try to figure out how to activate your Google Assistant. Google Assistant is typically built into Chrome OS and Android because it's part of Google. It's going to be part of those operating systems, and it's synchronized with your Google account. So the Google Assistant that I talk to on this device is the same as the Google Assistant that I talk to on this device. And Google Assistant can be very, very useful in a lot of different situations. I use Google Assistant for things like timers and alarms. If I'm doing any kind of cooking, which I typically do, I'm usually the guy that does the cooking in the household. I use Google Assistant for setting timers so I don't burn my bacon or whatever that might look like. I also use Google Assistant for getting answers to simple questions. My other half and I, we might be sitting on the sofa at night. We might be watching a particular TV show, and we see that one guy comes on the TV show because he's doing a guest spot or something like that. And I'm thinking in the back of my brain, I recognize that guy. That's that one guy from that one show. And of course, my other half is sitting next to me, and she's saying, "No, Tyler, that's not him. He's this guy from this other show." Well, now we have an argument. Now we have a debate. So what do? We ask Google. Google, who is this person? And we can get some of those answers. Sometimes I use it for other things. I like to set up a lot of things in Celsius. A lot of my temperature gauges that I use are set up in Celsius. Because Celsius and Fahrenheit, the formula for that can sometimes be hard to do in the top of your head. I use Google Assistant to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit and Fahrenheit back to Celsius, or from millimeters to inches, or vice versa. I also use Google Assistant for entertainment. My entire home is set up with Google Home and Google Assistant, and I like to play my music through YouTube Music. Because I use a lot of that Google ecosystem, I can control my music right through Google Assistant. I also use Google Assistant for controlling other devices. I have things like Wi-Fi light bulbs or even a doorbell on my front door. And those are wired up with Google Assistant. And I can control it right here from my phone using the Google ecosystem. Now, as we get finished up with this module, I just have a small exercise that I'm going to challenge you to explore before we move on to the next parts of this module. And my challenge for you as we get finished up here is I want you to take your personal device, whatever that might be, and I want you to discover how to access Google Assistant from your personal device. Now, that might take a little bit of work because every device is set up a little bit differently. If you've come through some of my other modules, as I mentioned before, every computer is set up a little differently. These are computers too. So every single device is going to have a little bit of a different variation to it. I challenge you, discover how to access Google Assistant on your own personal device. Now, if you're using an iPhone, iPhones don't have Google Assistant. You would be using Siri instead. Once you figure out how to use Google Assistant, ask your Google Assistant some of the questions that you see here on the screen. And you might be surprised as to what the answers might be. Now, just to summarize what I've talked about here in this module, we started off by talking about what Google is and why our Google accounts are so important. We also dove into how to create a Google account, and more importantly with that, how to create a good professional email address. We also talked about the home screen of our devices and how we can customize those to suit our needs. We talked about what applications are and how to recognize some applications that might not be safe for our devices. When we finished up with applications, we talked about the Google Workspace. Keep in mind, the Google Workspace is that series of applications that's typically built into our devices for doing stuff. And those main three that we like to work with, Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides. That's our holy trinity. We also talked about the internet and how to stay safe on the internet. I hope you remember that phrase, look for the lock. And then finally, we talked about Google Assistant, and I challenge you to discover how Google Assistant works on your devices. Thank you so much for watching this module on Android and Chrome OS, and I'll see you in the next video.